Okay, let's analyze it the way we would any set of interactions in a community. Let's say, okay, what happens if we increase cane toads? We started out with none, and now we've got a bunch running around, so that's an increase in cane toads. And what happens is cane toads, because they're eaten by these things, have negative effects on these things. So we can imagine the feedback is negative, negative, and negative. Well, if these things are negatively affected, their numbers go down, which means they're not preying on as many crimson finches as they used to be if there are fewer monitors running around. Now, the crocodiles really have nothing to do with it here because they're actually not affecting the crimson finches. Or are they? Did anyone notice that crocodiles might also go down because they eat the cane toads? And if that's the case, if they're negatively affected by consuming cane toads, they might affect the monitors which prey on crocodiles. So we might have an indirect effect then which influences how many monitors there are, not just because they're eating cane toads, but because there are fewer crocodiles that they have as prey. And of course, it's the very small young crocodiles, again, at the nestling stage, that is the biggest threat of having to worry about a monitor eating them. But in this case, we can imagine all kinds of indirect effects. Now, the obvious one, however, is that because many predators of cane toads are also predators of crimson finches, and cane toads have a toxic influence on those predators, the crimson finches should actually benefit from the introduction of cane toads. And so, you should say, false. The number of crimson finches should increase. That's false. Should increase, if anything. I was just reading it blindly there. Okay, so let's actually ask ourselves what did happen. Researchers have studied this. They happen to be studying a community and measuring the numbers of individuals and populations over years, just the way we talked about before when we mentioned like populations of whales and we said you would use mark recapture or you use sampling. They were using techniques like this to monitor populations when the cane toads reached a certain part of Australia. And they thought, this is a great opportunity to see how cane toads will influence the other species in this community. So what we have here are data on the x-axis from 2009 to 2013. And you can see that we have data for 3 species. The crimson finches are the triangles. The monitors are both kinds of circles, open and closed circles. So these are the predators, right? Now the important piece of information, an important piece of information here is this is the period where the cane toads actually reached this part of Australia. So right here, between 2010 and 2011, is when the cane toads were introduced. And I thought I had a little graphic that would pop up as an arrow, but I didn't, which is why I went forward on the slides. So I'll just draw my little graphic. There you go. So cane toads come in. Now with cane toads invading, we hypothesized, correct me if I'm wrong, we hypothesized that the predators should go down, but their prey would go up. And actually, if we look, that's exactly what they found. And they started measuring crimson finches just to see what would happen, and they found that, in fact, the density of crimson finches went up during this. And I think that's pretty good evidence that what's happening to crimson finches is that now their survival went from approximately 50% to 80% over the course of just a few years. That's a pretty dramatic increase, which you could see parallels the decrease in the abundance of the monitors that are predators. So this is some evidence, observational evidence, that when we introduce a cane toad, it has an indirect effect on another species, in this case the crimson finch. Now overall, if we look at everything that happened in that community, the number of species dropped by 35% when toads arrived. And think about that, 35%, that's a huge change in the structure of a community, the diversity in a community. And that's analogous to some of the effects that you will read about in your textbook, where people have done experiments where they remove what's called a keystone species from a community. And also the reason why it was bad when people started shooting otters, which itself is a keystone species in certain communities. Because of big changes in the community result when certain species are removed, In this case, however, it's a little bit different, isn't it? We're adding a species, not removing one. And we're adding a species that doesn't belong there, that hasn't been there. When I mean doesn't belong, I mean it hasn't been there in millions of years, and the species there have all evolved, co-evolved with one another, but not with the cane toad. So true or false? Ask yourself this question. True or false, a cane toad is a keystone species in this Australian community?